you ever notice how easy it is to give a recommendation for a great movie or restaurant? Usually whenever you eat at a really good place, so like last week, we ate at a place where it was buy one, get one free pho. And I just felt like I had to tell people about it because I was like, this is amazing. Like, this doesn't exist anywhere. And it's actually good too, right? So it's so easy to make recommendations about experiences you have or things that you like, right? It's easy. But I've noticed that sometimes we can get tongue-tied talking about our faith when a relationship with Jesus is better than any movie or restaurant experience that we've ever had. And yet there are times where it's just hard to get the words out, or maybe don't know what to say. Like recently I was getting a haircut, right? And I've talked here and there with I don't know if it's a female, is that a barber still? I don't know. Hairstylist? Something? I don't know what you would call her. Anyway, I was talking to Tina. She's been cutting my hair for a long time. And very sweet woman. And she was talking about the afterlife and things, and she mentioned about not knowing, and then as a believer and as a pastor as well, like I have a lot I could share on the subject, but I felt kind of tongue-tied in the moment. Like, how do I address your I don't know-ness, right, in this moment? So we just kind of kept talking, and then I was driving in the car later. I was like, Lord, I just didn't know what to say or like ask, or just based on how she said she didn't know. I didn't really know what to say, and didn't feel like the Spirit was giving me something in the moment. And then I was like, Lord, what should I say next time? Because I felt kind of tongue-tied in that moment. And I felt like God was saying to me, ask her what it would take for her to know. And I was like, oh, that's right. Because I think I was trying to figure out what to say to make her know. But I didn't really know what criteria it would take for her to know. So that's where I got kind of stuck, right? So I think sometimes it's so easy for us to get tongue-tied, maybe also in a workplace, you don't want to get fired, or you don't want to talk to these friends because then they'll disown you, right? And there's so many reasons why we may get tongue-tied about talking about our favorite experience, namely Jesus. But what we're going to learn today is how to do it effectively, right? Now, I'm not going to discredit different methodology, methods of sharing our faith. There are many different ways you can share your faith. Some people have like a script, and you can use that script. I tried doing that one time in high school, sharing my faith with a friend of mine, Drew, as we were sitting in the auditorium in our high school. And I was using a script that we learned from youth group, our high school youth group. And it was basically like the Living Waters scripts with Ray Comfort, and I don't know if you've ever seen his YouTube content, but it's pretty popular online. So I was following that, and it just was a total train wreck, because I was asking him these questions like, have you ever looked at a woman with lust? And he's like, yeah, why are you asking? And I just felt so stupid. And then right in the middle of it, he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, shame. So I just felt so dumb the first time I tried to share my faith. So methodologies are great. They can work. They can help. But the easiest way is sharing your story. And sometimes it could be the most effective. And that's what Paul's going to do in Acts 21. And the question we're asking today that I believe this passage is going to answer is, how do we effectively communicate our testimony to others so that they follow Jesus? How do we communicate our story to others so that they may be Christ followers? Turn to Acts 21, and we will get started. Acts 21, the end of it, verse 37, where Paul, if you'll remember, has journeyed to Jerusalem. He is going to the lion's den. Keep in mind that this is the same city in which they crucified Jesus. It's the same city where there was big persecution starting, ironically, Paul started that persecution in Jerusalem, persecuting the early church. And now, strangely enough, he's going to be persecuted when he was the one starting the persecution in the first place in Jerusalem. So now he's going to address the crowd. But we'll start in, chapter 1, verse 37. So as the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" "Do you speak Greek?" he replied. "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" Paul answered, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people." After receiving the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. When they were all silent, he said to them in Aramaic. All right, we'll pause there. Just so you're aware, Paul is going to Jerusalem because he feels compelled to do so, even though he's already been warned that it's going to be rough there. He's going to obviously be persecuted. And what's interesting as he is having this exchange with this guy, the commander, the initial impression of Paul is, "Oh yeah, weren't you that guy a long time ago who started a revolt with like a couple thousand people, and then like you disappeared, and then now you're coming back? Like, isn't that you? Are you the Egyptian guy?" And Paul's like, no, I'm not that guy, right? So it's interesting how the commander just assumes, because of the crowd's hostility and reaction to him, that Paul must be a terrorist or someone really, really evil, someone really, really heinous to rile up a crowd so much that the entire crowd just wants to kill this guy. And Paul's like, "No, man, like, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not trying to start anything. No violence. Like, I'm not trying to do anything." But it's interesting from another person's perspective. They recognize how tense the situation is. They're like, "Wow, this is really explosive. He must be a terrorist. He must be this Egyptian guy," right? So that situation did get stopped. I believe it was by the governor Felix, and they basically squashed this little rebellion and said, "Nope, not today. Not today." And they stopped the rebellion then. We'll go on to verse 1, and this is where he starts speaking in Aramaic. Notice how versatile Paul is. So he's Hebrew, he speaks Hebrew, but he also speaks Greek. He writes, Greek letters in the New Testament, and he also can speak Aramaic. This guy's very gifted. So now he's going to give a speech in Aramaic to the Jewish crowd, and says, "Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense." When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. So they're probably surprised that he can speak like this. Then Paul said, "I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of the way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. As the high priest and all the council can themselves testify, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' 'Who are you, Lord?' I asked. 'I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting,' he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. 'What shall I do, Lord?' I asked. 'Get up,' the Lord said, 'and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do.' My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, 'Brother Saul, receive your sight.' And at that very moment I was able to see him. Then he said, 'The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name.' When he returned to Jerusalem, he was praying at the temple. and was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there, giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Okay, so this is Paul's explanation of what's going on. Paul is trying to show to the people, hey, like I was persecuting Christians, and now I am one. So here's my story. I'm going to, as convincingly as possible, I'm trying to share with you my story in a way that communicates I am not making this up. He says, I am a Jew. I was born in Tarsus, and I also studied under the famous Gamaliel, who was a very famous scholar in Jerusalem. So Paul's like, you guys heard of him? I was his student. I learned under him. I'm very, very zealous for the law. I even persecuted Christians. I imprisoned them. I killed them. I held their cloaks when they were stoning Stephen as well. And the Sanhedrin, the council, they know me very well because they gave me the approval to even persecute the way, or Christianity, if you will. So Paul's saying, hey, like I'm a super Jew. I'm like very, very Jewish. Like I was very, very, very into the Jewish faith, right? So what he's doing is he's saying, hey, like, listen to me. I am genuine in what I'm saying. And he's also putting himself out there because he's like, you guys can even check. You can ask all the people that I'm referencing and they'll say, oh yeah, like we know him. We know Saul. We also know that somehow he changed his ways, right? And he goes into his story, his testimony, if you will. He shares his supernatural experience of his encounter with Jesus. And what he's saying is, I was even going to another city to kill more Christians, because that was a hobby of mine back then, is to imprison and kill them. And he says, I saw this flash of light, and it's at noon. So what is this implying? The sun is at its highest peak at noon. And he's saying, I saw a light that was even brighter than the sun itself. And it blinded me temporarily for a couple of days. And we talked about this some months ago when we were in Acts chapter 9. When we talked about the level of light or the amount of lumens necessary to blind someone is actually similar to a nuclear explosion. So Paul basically saw the light of God, and it was like a nuclear explosion, like seeing it up close, and it blinded him so badly he couldn't see for a couple days. Paul's saying, I even heard a voice. I heard God's voice saying to me, like, why are you persecuting me? So I'm blind. I'm hearing voices. Like Paul is trying to explain to them, hey, I had a supernatural experience, and like you got to hear me out, because there's no reason why I would become a Christian, because I hated Christians. So why would I become the thing I hate? That's basically what he's saying. And he's saying, I was blind, I was spiritually blind, but now I see. So he talks about how he received his sight again. He was baptized. He was forgiven. So this idea of like being baptized, it's not like the act of baptism is washing away the sins, but it's like you do it in conjunction. He's like I'm choosing to follow Jesus. I trust him. He's forgiving me, and as an act of displaying what he has done for me, like I'm getting baptized because my sins have been washed away, right? So he goes on to say too that he is also being sent out to the Gentile nations. And he's like, that's why I haven't been around, because I've been all over the Greco-Roman world planting churches and telling people about Jesus and getting beaten near to death. So that's why I've been MIA for a while. But now I'm back. Surprise. So now this crowd, interestingly, they don't interrupt him, right? Did you ever watch interviews and you get stressed where it's like people are constantly interrupting each other? It's like I just feel stressed during those like debates or interviews and things like that. But it's interesting. They're all quiet. They're like listening to everything he's saying. It's like, oh, what a refreshing experience. They're just letting someone speak, right? But that's so fascinating. Like he's talking to the people who want to kill him, and they're just listening to what he's saying. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so now in verse 22, it says, the crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him. He's not fit to live. Wow. As they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the commander ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and interrogated in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. As they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. What are you going to do? He asked. This man is a Roman citizen. The commander went to Paul and asked, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? Yes, I am, he answered. Then the commander said, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship, but I was born a citizen, Paul replied. Those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. Okay. This is what is going on, you're probably wondering, in this passage. What is happening? Okay. Basically what's happening is Paul is going to be killed, and the Roman guards are like, let's get you out of here, and we'll just whip you instead in this corner over here. We'll just whip you near to death. And right before they're going to start going to town, Paul's like, you can't do that. And they're like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm a Roman citizen. So could he be lying? Well, in some sense, he could be lying, but is also punishable by death to lie about being a Roman citizen. So that's why they probably accept his statement so convincingly. They're like, well, he wouldn't be saying that unless he actually was a Roman citizen. So, oh yeah, we can't do that. We can't hurt him because he needs to have a trial first. He needs to have a trial, and then we can whip him. But they haven't given him a fair trial yet, because as a Roman citizen, you need that first, right? So what is Paul doing? Paul is being strategic. Paul, essentially what he's doing, he doesn't always play the ace in the hole of his Roman citizenship. He can if he wants. Sometimes he doesn't, because he's like, if I get beat up, then that's good for the gospel, because then it shows that the message is legit and people can receive my message more clearly. In this case, what he wants to do is he wants to get to Rome. So if he gets a hearing about, if he gets a fair trial, if you will, then he can go to Rome. And his goal is to keep spreading the gospel and eventually spread the gospel in Rome. So that's why he plays that Roman citizenship card, because not only can he stay alive, but then he can also get a fair trial, and he can potentially get access to Rome. And we know later in the book of Acts that he's going to start talking to Roman leaders and governors and such, so that he can continue to spread the gospel. All right. So that's basically what happens here with Paul's strategic move. We can definitely assume, based on this passage, that Paul is full of courage. Paul is full of courage to stand in front of a giant mob who is about to kill him, and Paul is still trying to make them believe in Jesus. That's amazing, to stand in front of a crowd like that are bloodthirsty and want to kill him. And he is standing there, standing his ground, and he's like, hey, like, this is what happened to me. Like, you guys also need to follow Jesus. This is my charge to you. And I think, unfortunately, if we try to do this kind of work of sharing our story with other people, I think it's going to often fall flat, like it has for me sometimes in the past, when I try to share my story and maybe I'm feeling scared, or I'm feeling fear of rejection, or all kinds of things I'm worried about. And if we just rely on our own power to tell other people about Jesus, it can lead to hopelessness, because sometimes you don't get the results that you're looking for. You know, you share your story with someone and they're like, whatever, I don't care. then sometimes it makes us not want to share our faith really with other people anymore. For like, well, what's the point, right? We kind of become ambivalent, like, oh, why should I share my faith? Who cares if, who cares if, people hear it or don't? So sometimes it can be too based on results, or sometimes we're just trying to really be eloquent on our own. We want our own words to be very persuasive and convincing and come out very beautifully, and sometimes we stumble over our words, and that is very disheartening. And sometimes we don't really want to share anything with anyone because we don't want to sound stupid and don't want to look stupid in front of other people. So sometimes we can let fear in, people pleasing. We do all kinds of things like that if we rely on our own selves, right? We also sometimes just don't want to phrase in a way that potentially offends other people, because unless you're kind of weird and like offending people, typically we don't like to be at odds with people and offend people just for fun, right? And both of these things, both of just the ambivalence of and not caring anymore, or like what's the hope of trying to share the gospel with people, or the I'm too scared or I'm people pleasing, both of these things will lead us to not try very hard to share our story with anyone, right? And the unfortunate reality is then no one will be saved, right? So turn to Romans 10 real quick, and we'll take a look at this. Romans 10, verse 14. Romans 10, verse 14 through 15 says, "How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." So in other words, God has sent us to share with other people our story. God wants us to share with other people. And could God in other ways get people's attention? Yes. Like so many actually Muslim Christians have come to faith because they had supernatural dreams of Jesus. So can people come to faith in Christ without a missionary directly talking to them? Yeah, sometimes Jesus says that, but that is not the default. If anything, that's the exception of how God typically gets the gospel message through to people, and he usually does it through us. So in other words, this passage in Romans is saying, they're not going to be able to call on Jesus if they don't believe in him, and how are they supposed to believe if they haven't heard what the gospel is? So they have to hear the preaching of someone. And early in Romans, it says this in Romans 1, the gospel solves the problem by helping us to have courage in sharing it, by trusting in the one who has the power. Because Paul says also earlier, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from the first to the last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith." So in other words, when we're sharing the gospel, if there's any degree of shame or doubt or anything, that's not the best mindset for us to have as we're trying to share our faith. And if that's where our head is, I think we're forgetting the nature of the good news itself, because the good news is by nature power. It is the power of God. And it's not about us. It's not how well we can say something, or it's not how confident we can come across, or any of those things. We're just simply telling people the good news. And you're also just sharing a recommendation, as if you were going to recommend your favorite food place or your new favorite movie that you just saw, right? You're just, in the same way you would do those things, you are recommending Jesus to people. The point of the gospel is that it isn't about us. It's not trying to point people to look at us. It's hey, just look at, you know me, look at my life and look how it's changed. And guess who changed it? Because I couldn't change myself. Right. And that way we can also take the burden of other people's eternal destinies. Like the burden is no longer on us anymore. It's on God. Because we're like, hey, don't focus on me. I'm just trying to point you to the one who actually can take care of your soul and change your life. So when we share our testimony, the burden isn't on us to make things as persuasive as possible. We're only trying to point people to the only one who can save them, and we can't save them. All right, so here's where we get interactive. I'm going to have Leanne come up. Oh! And we are going to come up with something to collectively. Can you write that? Like, is that a good spot for you to write? Yeah. Okay, cool. So we're going to brainstorm together. Hold on. Yes, okay. What are the elements of an effective testimony of someone's salvation? What ingredients do you think comprise of an effective testimony? Good. Good. Life before Christ. Yes. Good job. Effective testimony. Okay, so life before Christ. Let's write that. Yeah, life before Christ. Thanks for doing it even with your injured finger. Okay, good. So life before Christ. Ooh, genuine? So don't be a fake? Okay, being genuine. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Genuine. Oh,
I always get it confused.
You're good. Don't be a fake. Don't be a fake. And yeah, be genuine. Okay. Great. Okay. What else we got? What are some other ingredients to an effective testimony about your relationship with Jesus, how you came to faith, your testimony? Discipline. In what way?
Like making sure to dedicate yourself to the different other ingredients, because it's easy to kind of get swept away in other directions. So you can actually stop and remind yourself, even when it's hard or tempting to do other things.
Okay. Let's say, I'm going to use a different D word. I think that also is I'm trying to encapsulate what you're saying. Let's say devotion. Yeah, your devotion. And then I'll flesh that out a little bit. Thank you. What else?
It's got to be personal.
Personal. It'd be funny if you're like, I know a guy, and his life has really changed. Right, make it personal. Good. Okay. Repentance. Good. I love that. Let's write that. Oh yes, and yes, since you are writing, that doesn't exclude you from offering something, Leanne. Yes.
I actually recently just wrote a testimony with my grandma for myself, so that was one of ours.
I love it. Good timing. I was about to dab, but then I restrained myself. So. Okay, cool. Repentance. What else? These are very nice.
Did you Google it? You were Googling it. I feel like
asking questions. Asking questions. Good. Very good. Anything else?
That felt like a weird angle. think my handwriting is getting smaller. I hope everybody.
It's okay. At least it's neat, yeah. Anything else you want to offer?
I would say life before Christ, but also life
After?
or not
Yeah.
after. But
I know what you mean.
with
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah. Let's write that. Yeah. Life with Christ. Yeah. Beautiful. One last one? Anything?
Basically, like sharing how the gospel message infuses that into testimony.
Okay. So, right. So, basically, we're going to share the life of Jesus, or the work of the work of Jesus. Yeah. The work of Jesus. Something like that. Beautiful. I think we got a great list. I think I'm going to do this next time I preach. This is fun. I like this. All right. Thank you, Leanne. So let me, I'll take the thank you so much, and you can have a seat. Thanks, Leanne. You rock. All right. Well, let's explain this a little bit more, shall we? Let me do this. Let me stand where Leanne was standing. Okay. So, funny enough, I actually have some things related to this already in my application section. But, all these things I believe are like when you're baking something, right? You got to have all of the right ingredients into it. Now, sometimes, if you don't want chocolate chips, hey, that's fine. Like, maybe you don't want to include something in here. But what I do notice is we are trying to share our own personal story. So make it personal. Make it, because then that's also something people can't argue with, right? They're like, you didn't have that experience. Like, no one in the crowd, right, is saying that to Paul. Like, you didn't have that. Like, no one is saying that. They're just like, well, let's just kill him. But they're not disregarding like his experience. They're just like, we'll just kill him, right? Okay, so make it personal. Talk about your story, because like in the same way you'd recommend like food or a movie, like you don't necessarily you might recommend in a sense like eating at a restaurant or watching a movie because it's like, oh yeah, I heard it was good, like, but you would probably not say you need to go see this movie because that would be weird. Like you haven't even experienced it yourself, right? So we make it personal. We share what Christ has done in our lives. And I like this as well. Yeah, don't be fake, be genuine. I like this quote by Lee Strobel. It's this book called Inside the Mind of Unchurched Harry and Mary. Unchurched people aren't looking for perfect Christians, just honesty. They don't want them to pretend their lives are problem-free. They merely want an admission that they struggle too. It's when unchurched Harry and Mary see a collection of Christians hiding behind a facade of perfection that they begin to smell a cover-up. Because people are very perceptive, right? They're like, you seem a little too polished and clean cut. Like, I don't trust that. It's like the first time you drive to Irvine, you're like, it's just a little too polished. I don't know. I don't buy this. Something's wrong here, right? And lo and behold, there is a lot wrong there. There's a lot of domestic violence in people's homes, but you just don't see it. But like the streets look nice or whatever, right? Okay. So, people can detect a facade of perfection, and people are like, no, that this is plastic. This is not real. So make it genuine. Make it rough. Make it real. Make it raw. Yes, make it genuine. Okay, make it. And then I think also too, this is key. I think to explain your life before Christ, because it helps. It's kind of like if you were to share the story of the Bible, right? And you just start with Jesus, and you're like, but why did Jesus have to come? You're like, oh, because like the fall and everything got really bad before, right? So it's kind of the same thing when you're sharing your story. And actually, when you think about it, it's really what makes stories, because stories have to have a problem. If you have no problem, there's no plot, right? And then the twist or the resolution is the gospel, right? That's like, waha, like the problem got fixed. In the same way with all of our stories, there's like a problem, and then something, and then Jesus, right, fixes it, and then that's like the story continued. But you think about any movie or any book, right, it always has to have an unresolved tension or plot or whatever, right? And so having the life before Christ illustrates to people, like, yeah, even though I whatever, like, have this life, or you talk about any good thing that you've experienced, right? But you're like, hey, my life was empty. I didn't have peace. I was constantly caring about what other people thought about me. I lived for my career, or whatever those things were. And you're like, hey, I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm missing everything, actually. I don't have purpose. I feel so miserable, right? And because that's where people are going to resonate. They're going to be like, oh, I feel that too. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So tell me more, right? So then it just allows people to see your story as potentially their story, right? They can enter into it. And then, I think asking questions is so vital. Jesus asked a lot of questions, and if you read the Gospels, like, he answers maybe 3 questions, but for the most part, like, he does his own thing and he asks a lot of questions, right? So that also may be a good place to start too with other people, because it's probably best to not assume what people think, right? Or to assume what they mean by certain words, because they're like, I'm a good person, and you're like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, I'm not a serial killer. It's like, oh, okay, that's what you mean. So you're when you're saying you're a good person, you mean you're not malicious, right? But like the way the Bible defines good is perfect, right? So there needs to be also some clarification probably of what people mean by different, definitions of words, right? Okay, so then we talk about repentance. Repentance is change of mind or turning away, right? So you're like, I don't want this life anymore, and I'm going to have a change of mind. I'm going to change my mind about life and God, and I'm going to stop sinning. I mean, you're like, no Christian ever stops sinning perfectly, but there is a willful decision, like, I don't want this anymore. Like, I'm turning from this with everything I can offer. I'm trying to turn away from a life of sin, and I want to live in devotion for Christ. I want to live in a thriving, fruitful life with Jesus, right? And then what you can talk about is the work of Jesus, like, namely, him living the perfect life. He came to earth. He's fully God, fully man, died for us, loves us, and he rose from the dead. People saw him. Like, many people saw him. And then many people were martyred for him. And they're like, we saw him. We're not denying Jesus, right? So because of the resurrection of Jesus, that means that individual lives can be resurrected as well. Individual people's lives can be radically transformed. It was interesting, actually. I was hearing of a study of alcoholism. That was a weird way to say it. Alcoholism. But I heard an interesting study, and they were saying that one of the fascinating things they noticed about it is that the only thing that really seemed to work was if someone had a quote-unquote spiritual or like religious experience. And that seemed to be the only thing that helped people get out of alcoholism, apart from, maybe like kind of managing it, behaviorally, but like in terms of like their actual appetite for alcohol changed was an actual encounter with God, right? So you can talk about the work of Christ in our lives and therefore how it affects our lives. And that might be a great place to end, is here's how my life has changed. Here's how it is being changed. And I think as long as you don't communicate in a way that's like disingenuous and you're like, hey, like I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I'm really not, but I just have had so much other victory in my life that I do see the power of God working in my life, right? And that is like the life with Christ is a life of greater fullness and greater joy. And the way I would even phrase it too, because I think about my own story, but we all have like different kinds of testimonies. Like there are different, maybe a couple different types. One is like, I grew up in the church and I was a Pharisee, or something like that. That's probably more of mine, a repentant Pharisee. Another one is like, I was a rebel. I found Jesus, in the gutter, basically. Or I was in a cult or, some other religious organization. I, had a change of mind. I had, I was just at my wit's end, and somehow like God got me out of jail, or all kinds of other radical changes like that, or maybe just hitting rock bottom and just like I'm so miserable, I'm at the lowest of lows, and I needed God in my life. Whatever your testimony is, it's probably one of those five. And so it's just helpful to know what your story is. Like, how would you explain your story to people? Because I think sometimes we can minimize our story because it's not radical enough. Like, my testimony is a little bit more boring than so-and-so's. But the reality is, if and since someone's life is radically altered and changed for every Christian, then that means every story is valuable. Louis Giglio is a pastor who said this: people say all the time, I don't have a good testimony, because they think their story has to involve some dramatic story of change from bad to good. But Jesus didn't come to save people this way. Sin doesn't make us bad. It makes us dead. Jesus came to save by bringing the dead to life, and that's an amazing testimony, right? So it doesn't matter if you have like a blander testimony or it's not as radical or whatever. It's valuable because every person has something that the gospel satisfies, right? So for my story, mine is a little on the blander side because my parents are Christians and I grew up in the church. But my testimony is basically, if I were to kind of frame it like this, my testimony is, I remember early in elementary school, I think I told my dad, what I want in life is to have a big house. That's my goal. Remember, that was the goal of my life, to have a big house. That was the purpose of my life. Remember, that's what I said. So success was my God. I obviously grew up in church and believed in a head mental assent way, like, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus and God. But what I really want, what I want more than God, actually, if you were to really ask me, is success, so I can have a big house, or all the things that may come with success. And even when I got success, like, I had to keep having success. There was no such thing as failure for me. Like, I don't know what failure is. I'm going to just succeed all the time. And I remember in 4th grade, that's when they changed the letters, because 1st through 3rd grade, at least in my school, it was like S and some other letters that weren't A, B, C, D, whatever. But 4th grade is like, oh, it's serious now because we're using real letters to evaluate our grades. And I remember having A's all on my first 4th grade report card. I was like, oh, that looks nice. I like that. I felt like I was looking at a mirror, and it was like, you are so good, David. You're so successful. And I was like, I feel so good looking at this, So every report card from then on out, like, I had to get A's. I just had to see that reflection, just be satisfied, like, oh, David, you're so valuable. You're so worth it. Look at you, right? So for my soul, individually, that's what I needed to feel good about myself, right? And then it got better. In 8th grade, when I got straight A's, like through middle school, and then I could stand in front of everyone, and they all had to like acknowledge my success. I was like, oh, I like this. Like, this is nice, just looking at it individually. But now everyone has to see me. Everyone has to see me, right? And I felt so good about that, right? And then high school, same thing. I got straight A's, and everyone had to see me as a valedictorian. It felt really good. However, it was slavery, because I had to keep grinding to be successful. And things that were less than were not possible in my headspace. It was like, I can't get less than this. And so I was constantly stressed, constantly anxious, and like miserable. I was just always miserable. And it never was enough, because there was always another report card next semester to work for. It was just like a hamster on a wheel. I was so miserable. And then one day I met the real Jesus. And that was cool, because for the first time, I recognized my worth is not dependent upon my success. Because in God's eyes, like, my life is not a success. Like, if I were to give him all my report cards, like, Lord, here are all my report cards, look at all my A's. And God's like, yeah, there's a fireplace. Let's just throw that in the fire. That doesn't count for heaven, David, to get A's on your report card, because you got F's in the sin department in all these other areas of your life, right? And I think that was a moment where I was like, I don't need to validate myself anymore. I can get a B, a C, or a D in college, and I don't have to feel like the world is falling apart, or that I don't mean much anymore, or I have little value. And it just totally freed me to get bad grades. And then my parents were wondering, like, why are you getting bad grades in college? Like, were you only getting A's? And I just felt like so free just to not have to be a perfectionist anymore. Yeah. So that's probably how I might share my story. It's not like, radical in a sense that maybe some other testimonies are, but even still, like, people can resonate with certain aspects of your story, because we all need Jesus in every possible way, and your story resonates with many people out there.